while preaching, use at least 17 or 18 languages of the people to talk. So inclusion, diversity has been a way of life there, and therefore exclusion or having a mono kind of culture or identity would be a problem for any Indian mind or Indian historian for that matter. So that's why when the first time history was theorized in India by Rajshekhar in the 9th century, he said there are two types of histories. One is of a single hero, the other is of many heroes. And the example for history with single hero that he gave was the Ramayana. The example of history with many heroes he gave was of Mahabharata. And therefore our tradition is a tradition of history with many characters, many heroes, many episodes, many conflicting, contradictory views and opinions. All inclusive historical approach has been a way of civilization there, and we can no longer change it, fortunately.
I want to begin by saying thank you to the Maulana Azad Center for hosting us and for His Excellency Ambassador Bhattacharya for coming here right so soon after arriving. But I want to begin by talking about what I was putting together the panel. I think I'm a little, I have an interesting perspective here because I teach Indian history in the American University in Cairo. And so when I was putting together the panel, it occurred to me that the sheer diversity of the voices here says something about where and how Indian history is negotiated. So just to introduce our guests a little bit more deeply, for those of you who may not know, Professor Devi is in some ways at the forefront of negotiating right at the ground what sources can be made available for the writing of history in the way that Professor Magda was talking about, the necessity of the diversity of sources. So Professor Devi is the chair of the People's Linguistic Survey of India, which envisions the creation of a linguistic survey rooted in people's perception of language. And he's been a scholar of literature and linguistics, but he's also worked right at the grassroots in terms of what is admitted into the literature to be made into history. Professor Devi has been given countless awards, and including last year, India's fourth highest civilian award, the Padma Shri. And I think it's a mark of what scholarship still means to the making of the country that he was accorded this honor. Professor Menon has a very different trajectory and a very different history in terms of his career. And he embodies, I think, the first generation of truly globally trained, globally thinking Indian historian who negotiates Indian history in the context of those travels. So he studied in Delhi, in Oxford, and Cambridge. He's been a fellow of the Magdalen College in Cambridge. He's taught in India, but he's also had teaching positions in Cambridge and Yale, in Berlin and Paris. And he is currently the Mellon Chair in Indian Studies at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Dr. Magda Makhlouf teaches at Ain Shams University, and yet even here, what I was so pleased when I discovered Dr. Magda Makhlouf is the fact that India can be something more than Bollywood in Egypt. Not that I'm saying that Bollywood is anything bad, I love it too, Mashallah is amazing, but it is wonderful to discover that Indian history in another vein can occupy a scholar of Egypt. And in my own case, I had the great privilege of coming here 2 years ago to teach in the history department. My position is actually the professor in comparative religion. And it was absolutely fascinating to try to negotiate how to tell a story of Indian history that would make sense to Egyptian students. Now these are very global students in some ways, they're very well traveled, we teach in English at the American University, and yet the story I crafted had as much to do with Egypt as it did with India in the way that I devised the syllabus. Now, I'm not necessarily writing this history, but this is the history that I give my students and what we focus on, what stories do we want to tell about India that will resonate with students who are struggling to make sense of a really, really interesting moment in Egypt's history. So I think what is fascinating to me is not just the diversity within Indian history, but the various locations in which Indian history is now being negotiated and written all over the world, within India, outside India, in many languages. And I think that that is, in some ways, the most heartening story of India, that Indian history has become so much a part of thinking through history itself as a discipline.
Thank you, Ananya. You kind of preempted my next question. For decades, we've heard about the study of the Orient, and especially from perspectives of Orientalism. What is the experience of teaching Indian history in a non-Western context? And here I would like to bring in Professor Menon, as well as in what ways does Indian history speak to students in South Africa, for example? And I would like to ask Professor Magda, what are the themes in Indian history which have interested Egyptian students, and what would they like to, what are the areas they prefer to explore? What are the common grounds?
Yes. ما يتعلق بدراسة تاريخ الهند في مصر بشكل عام، فيما قبل الجامعي لا يتم تدريس شيء عميق يتعلق بتاريخ الهند على وجه الخصوص، لكن من خلال الجامعة بعد الانتقال إلى المرحلة الجامعية في إطار تخصصات معينة، وهي على وجه الخصوص أقسام اللغة الأردية وأقسام التاريخ. يدرس تاريخ الهند في أقسام التاريخ ضمن تاريخ آسيا بشكل عام، لكنه ويدرس أيضا ضمن التاريخ الإسلامي في العصور الوسطى قديما، والفترة الحديثة تدرس ضمن أقسام التاريخ الحديث. لكن في أقسام اللغة الأردية، وعلى سبيل المثال يوجد في مصر عدة أقسام تدرس اللغة الأردية، تتم تقديم معرفة متكاملة عن تاريخ الهند في جميع الفترات التاريخ منذ القدم قبل الإسلام، ثم وبعد أن أقيمت فيها عدة دول إسلامية إلى الدولة البابورية التي وحدت الهند في عهد سلاطينها العظام، ثم فيما بعد ذلك والعصر الحديث. هذه المرحلة التاريخية الطويلة جدا يتم تدريسها في أقسام اللغة الأردية، إلى جانب تعريف بالأدب الهندي المكتوب باللغة الأردية على وجه الخصوص بالحروف الهندية، واللغة أيضا الأردية على وجه الخصوص من ضمن اللغات التي يمكن أن يتم التحدث بها في الهند. لكن أكثر نقطة كل المصريين يعرفونها عن الهند هو تاج محل كأشهر أثر تاريخي، هذا يعرفه كل المصريين، من يعرفون تاريخ الهند ومن لا يعرفونه، لكن يعرفون أن هذه المرحلة كانت مرحلة مزدهرة جدا حضاريا، ويعبر عنها هذا الأثر الجميل. الشيء الملفت في تاريخ الهند الذي نعرفه جميعا هو تعدد الثقافات الكثيرة جدا، وتعدد العقائد والفلسفات والديانات، ومع هذا يعيش هذا المجتمع في انسجام وتوائم جميل. هذا بشكل موجز ما يمكن أن نعرفه عن تاريخ الهند هنا في مصر. التركيز بالأكثر على المرحلة الجامعية هي التي يتم فيها التعرف جيدا على التاريخ، لكن أرجع أعقب بنقطة أنه يتم التركيز على التاريخ السياسي بالدرجة الأولى، باستثناء أقسام اللغة الأردية التي تهتم بالتاريخ الأدبي وقد تتعرض لموضوعات تتعلق بالتاريخ الاجتماعي، ولكن مسا خفيفا. لعل هذا له عدة أسباب، أهمها عدم توفر مصادر كافية عن تاريخ الهند باستثناء ما كتبه المؤرخون العرب القدامى وبعض المصادر الفارسية المحدودة. أو لحداثة عهد أقسام اللغة الأردية في الجامعات المصرية، هذا أيضا قد يكون أحد الأسباب.
If I'm going to speak about the interest amongst the Egyptian students here to study the Indian history, I'd like to say that in the pre-university stage, you find that's not substantial thing is being told for the Egyptian students about the Indian history, but in fact in the university stage or the university phase, that you find that we have some departments like the Department of Urdu language and also the Department of History in various universities here in Egypt. They teach the history of India, but teaching the history of India comes within the in some parts about within the overall history of Asia. So, but there are also some other departments like the Department of History that they teach also the Indian history. As a part of the Islamic history and also as a part of the Islamic history in the medieval ages. Also, the modern part of the Indian history is being also taught at these departments, but not extensively. Also, we have here in Egypt several departments and several faculties which are teaching Urdu language, and this, to some extent, we can say that these departments give an integrated image of the Indian history, starting from the pre-Islamic period and also after the emergence of Islam, especially with more focus on the establishment of the Babur Empire there, which united India during the great kings of the Emperor Empire. Also, I can say that the Urdu departments also they give some glimpses of the Indian literature, which are written in Urdu. Also, I can say that about Urdu, as we know that the Urdu language is one of the languages which are being used and spoken in India. Also, the most important point that all the Egyptians, those who know history and those who don't know anything about history, know about India is Taj Mahal, which is the very famous monument there in India, which is actually a reflection or the icon of the Indian civilizational progress. And of course, everybody knows well about this in Egypt. Also, here we know in Egypt about India that it is a society that's, characterized, as I said before, characterized with diversity in terms of religions, in terms of languages, in terms of races. But still, in spite of all this diversity, we can say that the Indian society is characterized by diversity, but still in harmony. So everybody, live in peace there in the Indian society, in spite of all this diversity in all aspects. Also, as I'd like to say that during the university phase, there is a more focus on the political history of India, more than in other aspects, but there are some departments that they give some glimpses of the social history of India, and I think maybe this shortage of that, not having extensive study of the Indian history here in the Egyptian universities can be attributed to several reasons. I can enumerate some of them, that we don't have sufficient sources for teaching the Indian history, and this is mainly we have here only the ancient Arabic sources which are written by old Arab historians, or maybe some Persian sources that we have. I don't know, maybe this is one of the reasons, or maybe because also the departments of the Urdu languages in the Egyptian universities are still modern, so still newly established, so it might take some time.
Thank you so much. You have a difficult job translating. Otherwise, I'm so glad that you're here so I can understand what Professor Mandam says. There are two things I could say in answer to your question, because Professor Devi said earlier that there are two ways of writing history. Right? One is with one hero, the other is with many heroes. And there are two ways of asking the question of how to write the history of India. Is it the history of one space, or is it the history of many spaces? And when we think about the way in which history is written, I'd just like to present before you an example that the great French historian Fernand Braudel said. So you think about the map of India as being something like this. At the north, you have the Himalayas in Kashmir. South, you have the sea. On the west, you have Gujarat. And on the east, you have the northeastern states, ranging from Bengal eastwards. So Braudel said, what if we don't look at the map as going from top to bottom and from side to side? what if we think about connections? Then the map of India becomes much larger. So if you think about the northwest of India, it was connected to the Ottoman and the Safavid empires. And in an earlier time, Alexander came from Greece to conquer India through the northwest. So suddenly the history of India becomes connected up with the Greek Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire. If you think about the southwest coast of India, which is where I come from, it is connected by the Indian Ocean to the Middle East, to Egypt. Some of our prominent Muslim intellectuals in India, in Kerala, the state that I come from, came to study in Al-Azhar. They were very influenced by Islamic modernism in Egypt. And then if you go further west to Amsterdam, Lisbon, and so on. So Brudel was saying that we need to look at the history of India as the history of many spaces. On the eastern side, India is connected through the ocean to China and Southeast Asia, and to China through the land as well as the sea. So suddenly the history of India becomes less than the history of a map, and more the history of the movement of people, the movement of ideas, the movement of religions, and so on. When you think about South Africa, we have Gandhi on the walls, but it's important to remember that Gandhi reflects two histories. One history is the history of the British Empire, and under the British Empire, the movement of labor from India, not only to South Africa, but to Fiji and Mauritius. Slavery ends, the era of indentured labor begins, and Indians are exported as labor all the way through from South Africa to the Caribbean. And when Gandhi goes to South Africa, which is his first professional job as a lawyer, he spends 20 years in South Africa. Remember, Gandhi is a South African before he becomes an Indian. 20 years in South Africa arguing for the cause of labor, and many of the techniques that he works with, that he invents, and his politics mature, so when he comes to India, it is at the age of over 40. Now, some people say that most men stop thinking after 40, so maybe no new idea came out of that, but it is arguably true that Mahatma Gandhi's ideas of politics were forged not in India, they were forged in South Africa. And then they were exported, so to speak, to India. So in that sense, what would it mean to think about India not as a map, but as a history of many spaces?
I'll be brief. Well, the Western model of writing history, thinking about it, is one thing, but it is rooted in the idea of somebody belonging to a nation. It could be a different idea if one thought that one belongs to a civilization. Writing history of civilization would put, relatively speaking, the power question in the background and the production question in the foreground. There could be a history seen through the eyes of a river, the river Ganga and the river Nile. I mean, they could be compared, and that would be a fascinating way of looking at music that people have produced for thousands of years. This can be done by Turkey, China, Egypt, India, and it cannot be. It cannot be done by New Zealand or Canada. I think the way, if we were to describe faith or devotion, if we could describe relatedness, as Dilip said, if we could describe joy, there could be histories of joy, of relatedness, of faith, and bondage with the ecology, whether it is desert, the snowy mountains, or the seas. Man has so many sides, and only bringing one side at the center of history is reducing the power of history writing, telling story. There could be histories of narratives, folk narratives, folk songs, oral memories. They all left out of the history material because history developed as a discipline only when writing became the only way of being legitimate. Thank you.
what Professor Daly says resonates deeply with me because my own entry into Indian history was always from a comparative point of view. Because I actually trained in South Asian history and in Latin American history. So the other part of what I do and how I think is with the history of Brazil. Now the connections that Professor Daly were talking about, in some ways the Indian Ocean world is very easy to map in. It's harder to map exactly what you were saying, these newer civilizations, these places like Canada and New Zealand and Brazil, that were in some ways brought into the stage of world history through European colonialism. But what I have found is that actually, if we think not in terms of the nation, because it is impossible to write the history of Brazil and India in a meaningful way coterminously, if we think in terms of nations. But it does become much more interesting to say that if we look at what writing has meant in these two spaces, in terms of what it has meant for power, and what it has meant for the writing of history itself in these two spaces. So, for example, in Brazil, when the European colonialists get there, and they encounter these Amerindian tribes who do not write, they start to construct a civilizational hierarchy in which people who do not write are at the bottom of the rung. Except they use that deep, rich orality against these very peoples in order to destroy them, to create the basis of the colonial state. Now in India, funnily enough, there was writing, but for a very, very, very long time, the ideology of writing was not actually in the same way as a European ideology of writing, in which the literatus, the writer, was the person, a scholar like us. In fact, Indians for a very long time hid the fact of writing, because to be truly a literatus, an equivalent, would be to speak. So writing itself was an inferior form of knowing. And it was through speech and through listening that we really knew things. Now, putting those two ideas together makes us rethink what it means to actually write history. And what it is that we're doing, because we are engaging, as Professor Daly said, in a discipline that was intimately tied not just to the nation, but to certain European notions of what history is, of how states should be formed. And so when we come at it in these ways and we imagine all of these other ways of thinking about past, it also allows us not just to connect in interesting ways different parts of the world, but to also renegotiate our own histories with the nation. And that is, I think, the most liberating thing about what has happened within Indian history and the way in which it has moved and traveled, both within India and outside, in the ways that it has continued to allow us to negotiate the box of the nation.
Thank you, Ananya. I could go on and on here, but at this juncture, if there are any questions from the audience for the speakers, then we would be willing to take some questions.
You give me the mic, I'll take it.
First of all, I want to welcome you here in Egypt, all of you. It was a wonderful lecture. I'm an artist interested in Indian art. I want to know more about how to write about Indian art in all of these differences you are talking about, all over India, all over the last years. It's very ancient. Yes, how to just make it in levels, how to start, how to search books. Waiting for your response. Thank you.
Yeah, and if there are more questions, then we'll take them all together.
في أسئلة تانية يا جماعة، في حاجة عايزة تسأل أسئلة تانية، ناخد كل الأسئلة مع بعض وبعد كده نجاوب.
I'm journalist in الإخبارية newspaper. like first to thank His Excellency and welcome him. It's like a great chance to have a person like you in this kind of event. I believe that we are going into a new phase with India, and I believe that this activity, I myself is missing this kind of things. So I believe that in the coming few months we will find fresh kind of mentality. And I'd like to thank the here podium because I spent in India 7 years. Since I returned to Egypt, I didn't listen to this kind of diversity and ideas about the India, Egypt, and about the culture. You make me think again about the time that I was listening to the Arabic students in Delhi and all over India and their problems and how they want to know more about Egypt, they want to know more about the Arab world, but they are like, they want to get any contact with the Arab embassies or Arabic libraries. Again, here, this is the same situation, Egypt and India, that we still, as people to people, we are missing a lot of effort. Lots of things can be done in order to make those people who are similar each and everything. By the way, believe me, that just one look in your face remind me by the name Batashaya. Lots of thinkers and book writers, and I really believe, I in my PhD, I wrote this word Batashaya a lot in the reference. So we need more than those few ideas, and we need more in Egypt and in India at the same time. Thank you very much. And if there will be any way to improve the knowledge of Egyptians about India or Indians about Egypt, I believe that this I want to listen from you. Thank you very much.
Can I respond to these questions? Well, to your question, madam, Heinrich Zimmer writes about Indian art, saying that the spirit behind all forms of Indian arts is the idea that the form is an ever-expanding form. It does not close anywhere. So the sky is the limit. And sir, to observation about India and Egypt, I would like to say that out of the 22 recognized languages, official languages in India, 17 have accepted Arabic words, and nearly 22,000 or more Arabic words are used in Indian languages. So the way Indians think, not just in Hindi or not just in English, but in those 17 languages, I could name all those languages, but I do not want to bore you with those long list of names. But if a person's consciousness is made by one's language, then please trust me that the consciousness of an average Indian, educated or non-educated, uneducated, some element of the Arabic way of thinking is part of the Indian consciousness. And we must start, looking at, there was a John Donne poem where the blood of two comes together in the form of some, love affair. I don't mention that poem here, but, because you know which one. I think, our intertwining is now, irreversible, and we must take it forward in all ways possible. Thank you.
I won't say anything about art because I know nothing about art, but I will say something about what you were saying, sir, because I think, the time of my life teaching Indian history here. And what amazed me, I thought that I would not get many students, especially because I don't really like being bothered that much in my classes and things. And so it was amazing to me that from the beginning, from when I got here, my classes have been full. So whether I was teaching religion, in which I would teach Hinduism and Buddhism alongside the Abrahamic religions, or whether I taught an entire class almost entirely through translation of ancient Indic thought, beginning with the Vedas, the excerpts from the Mahabharata, the Arthashastra, the Jataka stories. And I had 22, 23 students in this class who sat with me and read stories from ancient India. And then I taught a class on a senior level seminar on modern Indian history, and the seminar again was full. So I think it was incredibly moving to see the ways in which my students here in Egypt were not only eager and curious to learn about Indian history, but then found ways to use what seems like a very distant history to make sense of their own lives, their own histories, their own spaces here. And so what you're saying, it resonates very deeply.
يعني أنا أشعر أن الوقت قرب كده أن ينتهي، لكن أنا أنتهز هذه المناسبة لأقدم لسعادة السفير الهندي في القاهرة نسخة من الترجمة العربية لتاريخ بأول. أهمية تاريخ بأول أنه بيتناول في جزء كبير منه يمكن نصف الكتاب بيتكلم عن الهند، خاصة في مطلع القرن السادس عشر. بيرسم صورة ليست سياسية أكثر ما هي صورة ثقافية وحضارية للهند في ذلك الوقت. واسمحوا لي أن أقدم له هذه النسخة هدية. مستر Ambassador, it's a great pleasure to present for you this first Arabic translation for Babur Nama. For you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. It's one of my favorites, actually, Babur Nama. So I'm delighted that you've done this.
Okay. Thank you. ويعني هو الكتاب مثله ان هو بيقدم لنا حاله المجتمع، يعني هي دي الجديد فيه ليست الحاله الجانب من السياسي، لكن بيبين لنا حاله المجتمع، حاله الشعب، ثقافه هذا الشعب. بيشير لنقاط جميله ومضيئه، بيتكلم عن انه فعلا يعني شعب غني. يعني لا أريد أن أتكلم كثيرا عن الكتاب، لكن أدعوكم إن شاء الله تقرأوه وأشكركم.
In fact, I'd like to draw your attention that half of the book actually speaks about India and the Indian society early in the 16th century. It is not only dealing with the political aspects of India, but also with the cultural and civilizational aspects of India. And so, of course, it brings some of the politics at the time, but still it also gives a very rich image of the Indian society at the time, the people, how the people used to live there. So I think that these are important points. So I request all of you to get the book and read about it. I think that you will like it. Thank you.
I would like to, I'm sorry, we are really out of time, but I want to thank the panel for opening, our minds to different ways of thinking about history in terms of connections of spaces, or in terms of the way the writing of history within India has always been assimilative, as Dr. Devi said. Also, if we were to write a history of emotion, then I think Bollywood would play a very important role in that, because it connects India and Egypt in a way that nothing else does. On that note, I'm sorry, Ananya, for bringing in comments.
It is not motion picture, it is emotion picture.
On that note, thank you so much. And I would request His Excellency Ambassador Bhattacharya to present some memento, token of appreciation to our speakers. Thank you.
Ladies first.
وفي نهاية هذه المقاطعة الثقافية التي كنا نتفرج اليوم عن تاريخ الهند وتاريخ الهند والميلاد الهند شكرا مقدم وشكرا ايضا للساده المتحدثين ولسعاده الست اللي هي الوزيره الجليله السيد سندرا البهتشايه وايضا كافه المتحدثين، والشكر لكم السادات والساده الحضور، والى اللقاء ان شاء الله في ملتقيات ثقافيه اخرى ينظمها مركز مولانا عزام الثقافي في القاهره. والان ادعوكم لتناول المشروبات